This episode is brought to you by Physician Services USA. Physician Services USA is your trusted partner in streamlining operations for independent physicians and medical practices. Their team of dedicated, South Carolina-based professionals takes the hassle out of billing, credentialing, practice management solutions, and more. If you'd like a well-run practice with all of the efficiency and none of the headache, visit physicianservicesusa.com today and discover the support you deserve. You're listening to the IndeDocs podcast, where we discuss important issues related to our mission to preserve, promote, and protect the practice of independent medicine. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome to the IndeDocs podcast. Thank you for joining us for this discussion about how to establish a new practice and transition from a large system model. I'm really happy to have with us today Dr. Jeris Cox, who is a reproductive endocrinologist, who is an independent private practice in Charleston, South Carolina, and has a great story to tell. As you know, these are our personal opinions. They're based on our own experiences and should not be taken as professional, legal, financial, or medical advice. And with that brief introduction, Jeris, thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So when I first met you, I was really struck by the travel that you made from a very institutional type of medicine, which is the military, into a full-on, independent, on your own, nobody helping you, figure it out by yourself type of thing. So I thought it would be a perfect topic because there are a lot of people who would love to do what you did, regardless of the specialty, obviously, but are kind of stuck in the, gosh, I'd love to do that, or I'd like to do what she did or he did, but I just don't know how.
Right.
So maybe you can start walking us through kind of where you were practicing, kind of that environment. What about it you liked, didn't like, and then how you decided to make the jump. And then we'll talk about some of the details as we move along. So
Sure, absolutely. So I had joined the military just as a health profession scholarship when I was in medical school, mainly to one, give back and do something a little bit different with my medical career, but also not to come out with tons of student debt. So I'm very thankful for the U.S. Army because I got a great education and, of course, came out through medical school and residency with money in hand instead. But I had practiced and trained at NIH and stayed in the military to do fertility care and IVF. And then in 2020, I was looking to retire out and really wasn't sure where I was going to fit in a civilian practice. And I think what many people experience, like myself, when you get out of training, I think we're taught the institutionalized medicine the most. So going into another academic center and or going into a larger private practice or private equity group is where I think most people tend to go. And I had exposure to that in training. During my fellowship, I trained at a very large group in the fertility industry and got to see how a very large practice worked. And I also got to see how a hospitalized setting worked by being in the military. But I didn't have really any exposure to true private practice solo provider practices. So when I was looking at getting out, I, one, had other co-fellows that went out before me because, mind you, there were many civilian co-fellows that got to train with me, and they were going right out from their fellowship to go into the civilian sector, but I owed the military time. So I got to see them go on to their first, second, and some even to their third job within 5 years. And seeing that, I really wanted to try to make sure I made the right fit up front.
I want to interrupt you there for 1 second. So
Yeah, sure.
actually, you mentioned something where some of your co-fellows and co-trainees were already on their third job.
Yeah.
By the time you were sort of starting to cycle out of the military. What was going on with them that you thought, they were changing job. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just curious, did you learn anything from what the
I
first job
did.
that they took to the third job that they took, what the difference was and what were they looking for?
Yeah, personally, I think many of my fellows coming out, granted not having the debt relief that I did with the military, a lot of them were looking at the price tag or their salary as a big part of it. Of course, many people also look at where they can get the most money and also be near family or support because a lot of people are having families at that time as well. So I think the two biggest important things I saw from a lot of them were either going near family or also where they could make the most money and not necessarily looking specifically at what different type of practices could offer them overall because we really just weren't given any mentorship in that. We weren't really taught about what to look for. And so many of our colleagues come out in quite a bit of debt that of course after only making 60 100,000 at most in your training, you're like, I need to get out of debt and make as much money as possible to get out of this. So I saw them go for money and also location, but they didn't really look and see what style of practice or think about what does that mean for me as a practice provider? How many patients am I going to have to see? Am I going to have to practice protocols that the group tells me I have to practice? Do I have to practice a certain way of medicine? Or do I really get to be independent in my thought? And so that's where I really learned a lot from my fellows.
So when you started, so now you had what, a couple more years left of service or your sort of payback time?
Yeah, we got out of our fellowship in 2015 and then I exited in 2020. So I had 5 years to watch my co-fellows and then 5 years of trainings below me go out and see what they did. And very few of them stayed in their first job out of fellowship or residency, to be honest. It was
Yeah.
actually more of a minority. And I think that there was many different reasons. One, they I think the biggest thing I saw was they felt like they didn't get to practice independently. That was a really big issue that they were having to practice a certain type of medicine based on the group that they were in. It wasn't really always the money because they were making decent money, but they either felt that they were overworked, didn't have a say in the resources or the hiring or the management. There was many different things that bothered them that led them to look for a different position.
So that was something that led me back to thinking as you're finishing up your 5 year sort of remaining time and you're starting getting close to now I have to find a job, right? And you've
Right.
got that information that you just shared with us. How did you start formulating a plan of what you were going to do when you got out?
Yeah. Again, not having had that exposure that they had, just seeing kind of the different processes they went through, I actually interviewed at quite a good amount of places, I would say, down the East Coast. I interviewed at different size practices. I looked at some solo practices that maybe I could join and then ultimately take over, but not necessarily start myself. And so I interviewed just really to get a better feel of the practice and what it felt like. And what I mean by that, because I was working in a big military institution, we worked inside a really big building where it was pretty easy to get referrals to other doctors, to get patients seen through different areas, whether it was imaging or labs. And I loved that, but it also was still very institutionalized. And I wanted to experience, in a way, like when I interviewed, what did it feel like to be in different practices? So how did the office flow from the front desk staff to the nursing to the medical assistants to the doctors? Did it seem like there were relationships there, or did it seem really tense in the office? Um, how did I see the patients interacting when they were coming in? So those were some important things for me, just because I really felt like I went into medicine to I mean, I think we all go in to help patients, but at the end of the day, I wanted to be in a practice where I felt like I had a say, where I felt comfortable having a say, where I knew kind of the whole group from front desk to back end, and felt like I was going to actually be a critical part of the team. And so interviewing for me was really important, at least for my subspecialty, because there's different parts in the fertility industry. We have embryology lab, we have andrology lab, we actually do our own lab draws. And so I really was trying to learn as I went, thinking if I ever do this on my own or if I ever go into a single practice and then get to take over, what things can I take from all these different places, the things that I like about them, but also the things that I don't like, and kind of create what kind of environment would I really want to create if I had the opportunity to do it. But that is not what I set out for up front. I set out to really join a small practice in the hopes that I could buy in and eventually have some sort of ownership or sole ownership. I wasn't really ready to jump into the frying pan, so to speak, of independent practice right up front.
And why do you think that was? I mean, again, we know what your story is, or we're going to
Sure.
divulge your story here in just a minute. But in terms of when you were saying, I knew I wasn't ready to jump into the frying pan, what did that mean for you? It's like, what were the things that the frying pan represented for you? What are the things that you were sort of scared of, anxious about, reticent about, however you want to call that?
I mean, everything. That's the truth. I mean, um, I had there's no classes in medical school or residency that teach you how to do the business of medicine. And that's what everyone that's listening to this can relate to. If you did, then you got really lucky. Um, I didn't have that. And I had never seen any of my fellows or co-fellows or people before me go out and just open up independent practice. In fact, I really had no mentorship from a really true sole private practice. So to me, I would have had, and I did, I had no idea where that would even start or what that would look like. There was no roadmap to say, hey, just follow these steps. It's really easy. That that just it absolutely terrified me. So it really wasn't a thought. My thought after interviewing with all these different practices was that I knew I wanted to be in a smaller group. I knew I wanted to have a say, and I knew eventually I wanted to be able to maybe own some of that, to have more of a right to, to say how I wanted to practice. Um, but that frying pan was, I mean, everything. You're just not taught this. So I think without having a mentor or someone to hold your hand, it's very hard to take that leap.
So once you sort of had an idea of, I'd like to join, I think you mentioned, I'd like to join a small practice of some sort
Right,
where I could maybe work my way through and then eventually become one of the owners or the owner, that type of thing, right?
right.
How did that work
It didn't, but
out?
that's okay. That's how the story comes in. I ultimately, after interviewing, found a private practice, a solo practice, a female fertility clinic that was looking to have someone buy in. And then eventually she was really wanting to transition out. So it was exactly what I was hoping to find
Right.
up
The
front, right?
ideal
Someone,
situation.
yeah, someone already did all the hard work. So
Right.
I just got to walk in, buy into it, be trained in it, and then have already a patient basis, already have all my equipment. Everything was already laid out for me. And I did this, of course, going into 2020, and with all good plans and COVID, had really was moving forward in that direction, setting up a private loan to get in with this practitioner to buy out part of the practice up front and then start practicing with her. And COVID, of course, put that completely off the table, so to speak, because the loan got frozen, as with many things that happened in COVID. And
Sure.
that private practice doctor ultimately sold her assets to a larger group, and I was in Charleston without a job.
So the frying pan became pretty real, right?
Right. I mean, it very much did. Charleston being a smaller, overall smaller city than, of course, DC or some of the bigger cities that I'd been in. There was already a fertility clinic here. In fact, there's two in the state of South Carolina. And they were obviously not hiring during COVID either because
Sure.
it was tough times for everyone, really. And so I was at a point where, luckily in the military, I still did deliver babies and did some basic OB/GYN care. And so, in the immediate aspect of COVID, once I moved here, I just became a hospitalist, basically went and covered down for the uninsured, for anyone that walked in the hospital that wasn't part of a private practice group. And I helped deliver babies or take, in ER patients. And it really helped in the very, very basic level groundwork of getting to know just other colleagues that could potentially be a referral basis for me. But that's not why I took the job. I took the job because I needed to have a
Needed
job,
a job.
right? I needed to make money. And also, I think altruistic wise, as physicians during COVID, we all were trying to help each other out. So if I was able to cover down in the hospital because others were out sick, it made sense to keep my skill sets up.
Right.
So the longer I practiced in the OBGYN community as a hospitalist, and more of the hospitals learned my story, I was encouraged by them to consider opening up another practice in Charleston, just mainly because in Charleston alone, there had really been only one fertility practice at the time. And while I appreciated the recommendations, once again, there was no one that really had a blueprint for me to know how to even start that process. But it did at least give me an inkling that maybe I could consider it, but I just wasn't really there yet.
Right. And I'm sure there are other fertility clinics around the country, or, there was a blueprint somewhere, but what about those other practices? Did you not feel like, you could tap into to sort of duplicate or do your own thing, in the community that you wanted to start back up?
Yeah, at this point, a good portion of fertility industry, and I would say close to 70% now, is private equity and larger group private equity. So groups that have multiple satellite offices across even different states or even in the regions. There's some really big ones out there. And while I have many colleagues in that setting, the one thing I found with the larger private equity groups that I didn't love was that the larger they got, I felt that the patient care fell off. And I saw that with even close friends that went to some of the fertility clinics that were those larger private equity groups. I had some close friends that would even go as personal friends of mine to try to go. And they had a hard time reaching doctors. They had a hard time getting follow ups from different parts of the practice. And at least in my specialty, people pay a lot of money because fertility is not always covered by insurance. And I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that if someone's going to spend this much money and can't even see the doctor or have some more one on one time with them, which is what I went into medicine for, I guess I thought, I could do this better. I want to have that one on one smaller practice feel. And I also felt like the amount that we were charging for our care, especially in these bigger groups, was pretty astronomical. And again, I hadn't sat down and looked at all of the numbers, so to speak, but I felt like there had to be a way that maybe this could be done better. And part of that was with interviewing at the smaller groups that I did. While they weren't sole provider practices, I saw some of the smaller groups do things better than these larger groups. But you're right, there are private practices out there that are fertility, but there's not a ton of them. And I didn't really know of anyone specifically out there that I could go to. I had never had a one on one interaction or even had a network with people that knew someone. So in that industry, it's hard.
So now you're sitting at home thinking everybody thinks this is a great idea. I have no idea how to do it.
Right.
What helped you start thinking that this is actually something you could put in place
To do.
yourself? Yeah.
you know, it's one of those things at night when you sit around and you're bored and you think of some fun things like, oh, it would be fun to name my fertility practice this, or it would be cool if I could do this. But again, having no groundwork. And I became very close to my neighbors that I had moved next door to, when I moved here without a job. And the girl's husband was a businessman and he did a lot with mergers, acquisitions. He had done a lot of big company business transactions. And while he never really done anything in the medical field, he certainly was much more experienced in a business model. And so both of them actually happened to be named Alex. And Alex had Alex come over and just talk to me one night. So the husband came over and talked to me one night and said, hey, my wife's been saying that you've been thinking about this. And I help set up businesses. I help consult with businesses. And while I've not done a medical model, I'm sure I could help walk through things with you. He's like, why are you so frightened to do this? It seems like fertility, there's not a lot of clinics here. He's already done some of his own research, right? And he's like, why are you so afraid to do this? And I'm like, well, I mean, one, I don't know what I'm doing. But two, my biggest fear at the time was losing everything, putting in money, time, pride, and then going bankrupt. And he started laughing at me, and I still remember it. It's so clear to me today. But he laughed, and I was like, "Why are you laughing?" He's like, "You're afraid of going bankrupt." He's like, "That's silly. You're an MD." He goes, "Yeah, you would lose some money depending on how much you put in, but I can set this up so that you know how to set up your business in a legal model that protects your house and your car. So, every state's different, but South Carolina, you are protected from some of these things. And he's like, if you set the model up, okay, the worst case, you go bankrupt, because you go get another job and you're going to make a lot more money probably than starting out a business for the first few years.
So that's actually a point that I was hoping you were going to make. And for people who are in an employed situation, kind of thinking about this, that it's really your skill set that you're taking with you.
Right.
That is the value that you bring to whether you're employed or whether you're on your own. That's the value you bring to your patients. So, at every step along the way, whether you're just starting medical school or whether you're finishing your fellowship, whether you've been working for 10 years in a given situation, your comment about that a lot of your colleagues had changed jobs 3 times in the first 5 years
Yeah.
is very telling, right? But it also is important for people to know that at every step of the way, you have the option to do something different where you're in control.
Yeah. And I think even people that have been in practice or been employed, I have several specialists that I've seen even in an institutionalized setting that I've had to see for my own care that have been in practice for some time and been like, wow, I have always kind of wanted to do this myself. And, how did you start it? They always ask me, and they are a little older. And I think the benefit of being older is you've seen one institution and the goods and the bads of it. You may not be as in debt or not in debt anymore, which is great because it actually gives you a lot more freedom in some ways for capital to help build a business. But there are some big benefits of being a practitioner for many years in a setting and then going out and doing on your own, because I do think your own experience in an institution that you see where things go wrong, you have the much more expertise to actually change and do stuff that you want differently.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that opening a private practice, whether you're coming straight out of your training and are still very young in your, experience, to being more seasoned and experienced and having a longer time in an institution to where you've practiced, I do find that there are benefits on both sides. And having that seasoned experience, maybe not being in debt, having had a lot of years to see where the system seems wrong for you, can really benefit you and your confidence level in moving forward and opening your own practice. So I truly think that all age ranges and all experience levels could benefit in taking the leap into private practice.
And doctors need to feel very confident in that is what they're bringing out. And that is what patients, banks, the community, all that is what they value. So
Right.
the actual putting that into a box, into a house, into a practice really starts kind of taking care of itself when you have a skill and believing that you have a service that you can do well.
Yeah.
That starts kind of, like you said, it starts kind of evolving on its own, and it actually feels pretty good.
Yeah, I think the motivation picks up the more you do it. It's kind of like every part of that business plan that I got completed. And it's like, I mean, most of us doctors don't like writing paragraphs, let's be honest. I was not an English major for a reason. But the more I knocked it out and got it more concise and looked at like census numbers, population, looked at practices around that would funnel into me, the motivation picked up. And I think what the best thing I could have learned from all of it is that I didn't have to know from the get-go how to do it all. I'm still learning 3 years in, but the more you dig, the more you knock out, the more things come, and not come in a bad way, but you just get to a crossroad and you figure out how to get past it.
So there's a big mindset difference that I've found, and I think you just
Yep.
explained it, between those of us who are practicing medicine and have to then set up a business, whereas business people look at setting up a practice of medicine is just not all that difficult or not all that, out of the ordinary. I mean, there
No.
are models for that. I mean, basic business things. And so what did Alex sort of tell you to do? Sort of, you could kind of walk somebody who really has never done this before is thinking, gosh, okay, so I think I can make the jump, but how do I start?
So I think the first thing, which was my biggest fear, right, after he, like you said, made it such a minute detail about being bankrupt. And I think as physicians, we're trained like, first, we're poor going through training, and then we want a job that's going to get us out of debt. The thought of going in more debt is absolutely terrifying. But when he left that night, I kind of sat back and thought, and I'm like, he's right. I'm gonna lose some money, and bankruptcy is not a joke by any means, but you'll have poor credit for a while. But at the end of the day, I can still work. I still have a degree, I still have a board certification. So that was probably the biggest relief off my shoulders for sure. And then he came back and kind of gave a very basic business model layout, I guess, if you will. It wasn't a business plan, but it was a layout of how do you set up a company that protects you from, significant bankruptcy, to protect your primary home, to protect certain funds that you have in assets. And then he gave me some more unique things to think about, one of which is just how to name your company to stand out, to help brand yourself in different types of cities. And where we are in Charleston, of course, things to think about that I think as a provider, I always thought was really fun. Oh, I can get this cool jingle of a name, but there actually are meanings behind what you name your practice, whether it's a center, an institute, or it's like, a boutique practice, how you would name it a different way. And then he also talked to me a little bit about how to look at hiring people. And again, it's something that's kind of in the background, but it's all very basic things you need to know just to get your foot in the door of how you're going to start setting up your
Right.
business. And part of it was just thinking about what type of employee do you want? Every business model is different. And depending if you're in a medical practice or, I don't know, own a grocery store, you're going to have different employees, different pay rates, salaried versus not, and benefits. And he really talked to me about wanting to hire a smart employee. And those are things that every practice model might need a little bit different type of employee for. But those are some just very basic things he talked through as far as like looking at your name, also looking at a location. He helped me get in touch with real estate brokers to look at leasing places and all just these little tiny tidbits, which truthfully you could get out of a book. But having someone that I knew personally give me this information, it felt safer to me.
So, sort of going down that list of things, I'm sure he had his own format, but things to think about, as you mentioned, the name and, kind of what kind of practice or what kind of flavor it is that your practice is going to have. But where do your patients come from?
Right.
When you're in a hospital setting or an institutional setting, whether it's military or academic or that kind of thing, you really kind of sit there and patients get funneled within the system,
Hmm.
right? You don't have to do any marketing. You don't really have to reach out, right? As long as you're doing a
Correct.
good job, you're going to be getting patients. But when you're now sitting there and you think, where are my patients going to come from? Are they self referrals? Are they other professional referrals? Is it internet? Is it all those things? It starts putting your mindset into then kind of guiding what your next steps are going to be. And I
Yep.
think when we talked earlier, you sort of mentioned how things started falling into place.
Yeah.
So as you start thinking about things, so tell us a little about some of the things that he made you think about that then kind of led to, well, of course, if I'm going to do that, then for me, this is what would work.
Right. And 100%. He did talk a little bit about depending on what type of specialty you're bringing in, what is your clientele? And for me, having worked in the OBGYN community already at almost a year at that time, I guess it was a little less than a year, but I had gotten to know a lot of the doctors that would have been a referral basis for me. And they were also a lot of group private practices or private equity practices, but they weren't necessarily all institutionalized like in a big hospital setting. So they had some freedom of who they were going to pick. And there was no fertility group that was associated with true institution in Charleston. So your referral base was there. And I had met half of them, and half of them had already encouraged me to do this. In regards to looking at other patient populations, he said, look at Charleston and the age range of patients that you have here. For me specifically, fertility, there are a lot of females. There's actually more females than males ratio in Charleston, and in the 20 to 40 crowd, significantly so, which is the patient population that I would be looking at helping. So he did help me think through a little bit of that. And then he said, your first steps, of course, certain licensing things, there's some big ticket items that you need to get done. Outside of that, he's like, you need to sit and pull up a business plan and just read through it and kind of work your way through it and see if, as you work through that business plan, does it start to continue to make sense for you to do this or not? And that's where I started. I literally, after I got over the huge relief of not worrying about bankrupting myself, I literally Googled a business plan model for a medical center. And it's not one, it's just an example out there, but it had so many different parts to it that it really allowed me to start thinking through the process in a little bit more focused trajectory instead of being all over the place and terrified. It started to really focus things. And like you said, the more I did it, the more it started to make sense to me that this was probably the right route I could go. And then when I reached out to the financial institutions and they walked me through what they needed, it just kept feeling like the dominoes kept falling in the right direction. And I'll tell you, I really thought that eventually someone's going to stop this. Like eventually there's not going to be a domino that knocks over and then it's going to kick me back into reality to be like, no, you don't want to do this. But that didn't happen for me. Actually, momentum continued to pick up the further I got involved in just planning it. And I was still working at this time. So I didn't have all the eggs in one basket at any shape or form. But certainly the more I learned and reached out and networked, the more I realized this is really a viable option for me.
And one of the things that is very different that you've experienced in the last 3 years than when I was going through the similar process, 20 plus years ago, is the availability of resources, right? So, in the past, you really literally had to hire somebody to do your X, Y, and Z. And, you can only afford so many full-time people. Whereas now you have lots of fractional resources where you can hire a fractional accountant and you can hire a fractional CEO and people who really are great at what they do, but are working for multiple clients at the same time.
Yeah.
And you can, your cost for that goes down, right?
Yeah, you save a lot of money.
So you don't have to hire a full-time staff of MBAs and financial planners and all that kind of stuff. You can tap into resources, right?
Right.
So anyway, so now you've got Alex's pushing you to go down the list of things, right? And
Yeah.
you're ticking those off, but you're still working.
Yep.
And how did you then make the break? How did you actually step out and say, I'm doing this, and announcing that you're doing it? And what did that take?
Yeah, I think ultimately it was the reaching out to financial institution and having them say, yeah, we think that we might be able to do this for you. And of course, they needed a full business plan. So, I was chipping away at all of that. But then they got me into the resource of South Carolina's Small Business Development Group, which every state has something similar to that. It's set up to help small businesses figure out how to build a business plan, how to budget for what they're doing. And so I worked with this gentleman from the small business group for free. They are free resources for you. I did not know that until the bank got me to them. But he really sat down and really, line item by line item, knocked out so much stuff that, again, as a physician, we would have no idea some of these things, like just, workers' comp insurance. I don't know, paper for your printer leases, just all kinds of just really different things that, sure, I sat down and I had a list of like 20 or 30 things, right? But there's really like hundreds of things you need to think about. And these people have done this before. This is their job. So he really helped look at like, what did I need? And now obviously my subspecialty is a very expensive overhead subspecialty. Not every person that goes out on their own is going to need the same type of capital and loan that I needed to start because I had a lot of machinery and equipment that is very expensive. But he really did put it in perspective. And then I could look at the numbers and what I thought referral wise. And it really started to make it come to life even more. And really, it was when the bank said, I think we're going to be able to move forward with this, is when I'm like, okay, this is happening. And I slowed down my job working as many shifts so I could put just more time in making sure I had the right quotes and right things to go into the budget, and then started looking at real estate. And it so happened the place that I was supposed to end up, join this practice and work in, that actual practice, commercial space was now available. And because of COVID, thank goodness, like not that lease is cheap in our city at all,
Right.
but I got a pretty decent deal on a real estate lease coming out of the COVID kind of, or still in the midst of the COVID pandemic. But that was when it was real. I mean, at that point, when I signed the lease for the building and I signed the loan, I knew I was in for a run, but it was exciting.
We'll be right back after this break.
If you are a physician or an administrative professional working in a medical field in South Carolina, we invite you to consider joining the IndeDocs membership. Members have access to exclusive resources and networking opportunities and are an essential part of supporting our mission to preserve, protect, and promote the practice of independent medicine. For more information, please visit our website at IndeDocs.com. That's IndeDocs.com.
So how private had you kept all of that? So again, you're working for an employer, right?
Yeah.
And at what point did you, or how did you explain a little bit how you literally said, I am now going to do something else, or I'm thinking about doing something else? Because that's also a really important step, right? I mean,
Right.
you want to be smart about while you're working for somebody else. I don't think you want them to know that you're not happy doing what you're doing.
No, not at all.
So, how did you do that actual transition once you had things lined up?
Honestly, I actually, granted, the position that I was working in was not in direct competitive space to what I was opening up. So a lot of our independent docs that go out are going to run into that where they're working for an employer, and then they're still going to go private in that space where they could pull patients from. I luckily did not have that, or was fortunate that I was dealing with pregnant people already delivering. Some of them may have had fertility issues, but I wasn't picking those out or keeping names. So I was in no way competitive, but I kept it quiet till the very end, until I had keys to my building and had a loan given to me and was ready to look at who I was going to hire to help just trying to start the practice, come in and put furniture together even. I would say up to about a month before I opened my doors, it was still very silent.
Were you still working?
I was. Yeah, I was still working some because, I wanted to make money still. I was having to put some money in of my own to get the loan and secure it.
Yeah, the realities of it, right?
Right. So, yeah, I was still working, and I actually continued for the first year and a half of opening my practice. Now, not with the same group in Charleston specifically, but I would take a weekend a month or a weekend every 6 weeks and go make extra money because I knew that, well, I didn't know if I was going to have enough money from the loan to sustain this business or not. And I think that's still very scary because you want to make sure you still have money in your bank account. I knew going in that I was going to definitely have a low salary, right? I think that's a realistic expectation that anyone that independently goes out, if you're going to go out and think you're going to make high six-figure salaries right off the gates, that's not realistic. I knew I was going to be making a lower income, but I also knew because I didn't have a ton of debt, at least right up front, and the bank was willing to support me. I knew I could survive and sustain myself on a set budget. But yeah, I kept working because I knew I wasn't going to be pulling a lot from my own business at the time. So I wanted to have that extra cash for me just as a backup.
So, other than your neighbor and IndeDocs, of course, what are some of the resources that you would point people to who are starting to, start looking around that you found valuable in your own experience?
Yeah, I mean, of course, if you have someone that's practicing privately, that's an integral part. I did not have that. Really, probably my first big network group I ran into was the South Carolina Small Business Development Center. They have a pretty easy website. So it's www.scsbdc.com. And they are basically a free group of business professionals that can really help set up correspondence with different banking institutions. They help set up business plans. They even have free courses. So they helped me up front just really get my budgeting together. But I had to reach out to them again this year. And they are the ones that introduced me to, gosh, 5 or 6 different financial institutions, and then an additional 5 or 6 different, like, nonprofits. And then I didn't join the Chamber of Commerce, honestly, until my, like, 2nd to 3rd year in business, which I think was a mistake because, again, there are people that have set up all different size businesses there, and yet it's not just about them knowing how to set up a business, but they have tons of networks. So, for instance, they got me involved with something called She's a Veteran. Again, obviously that plays back into my military roots, but it's a whole group of women that own small businesses in the state of South Carolina and actually even nationwide. And then they got me involved with SCORE, which is another group that's helped to set up small businesses, and that's just SCORE. So just by tapping into two of those big resources, the Chamber of Commerce and the South Carolina Small Business Development Center, that opened doors to even more networks of groups and companies that could help me. And I really think that that is where you need to start to get a foundation. And then as you grow as a business, you can come back to them and they will help you again and again because their job is they want you to succeed. If you succeed and you've asked them for help, that only helps one keep their funding from the government because it is a government run organization. But two, I think that they have a lot of pride in making sure that you can succeed. So um, those are the networks that I really have over the last 3 years gotten more and more invested in, and rightfully so, because they've really given me the relationships with different bankers, and there's even small fund groups out there that are for small business. One is called Climb Fund, CLIMBE, another easy one to remember. They are there to give small businesses more capital to help them when they're in a plateau phase grow even more. So, like I said, when I thought I was going to run out of money and thought I was going to either have to close my doors or potentially have to give part of my company away and get private investors, or even maybe have to let private equity in, God forbid, I reached out to the veteran business and the South Carolina small business, and they got me involved with the Climb Fund and other organizations that were willing to give me more capital to help my business grow without me having to sacrifice ownership in my company. And that's huge. Just having that resource is huge for you to fall back on.
So you've got the keys in hand, and you've got the bank has your personal cell phone number as
Right.
the guarantor, right?
They did.
So you went out and hired the staff that you needed to get started and all that. And then kind of fast forward a little bit, a couple of years into your practice. Tell us a little bit about how that feels now. Has it met your expectations? Is it the type of medicine you want to practice? Is there still something that you think, I wish I had done this differently because now I have to do it differently? Or kind of how do you feel about what you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, there are still surprises. And as I know when we first met, I've mentioned there's days when I joke and say, had I known all the ups and downs I would have gone through, would I have done it? And I've certainly had days where I've come home and crawled under a blanket and been kind of just stuck in fear for a little bit of a time. And then, you brush yourself off and you're like, okay, this was not something that I envisioned I was going to have to run into. For instance, just disagreements with the landlord and the lease. And a lease is very expensive money that comes out. Kind of having to navigate through some of those things. There are some tough things. I was about 2.5 years into my practice, and I ran out of money in the sense that the original loan I got was undercapitalized and I had put in a lot of my own equity. My husband had helped put in a lot of equity. I'd had some family loans, thank goodness, to help. But I was at a point where I really was worried if I was going to be able to keep my doors open without sacrificing my own ownership in my company, or was I just going to close my doors and that big fear of bankruptcy falling in my face. And ultimately, I Googled, literally Googled online, resources in Charleston, South Carolina for small business capital or resources to not have to give up ownership in your company. And sure, you're going to find a lot of different rabbit holes, but luckily I ran into the Veterans Business Outreach, who then said, you need to go back to South Carolina small business development. And at the time, I was like, they were just there for me to set up my budget and help with my business plan. I didn't realize that they were an actual ongoing resource that was there for me to utilize throughout the last 3 years. So one of my mistakes was putting in more of my own equity into my company instead of reaching out to them sooner, because I probably could have saved a little bit of my own assets. It's okay, it's done, it's a learning experience. But by reaching out to the small business group, South Carolina Small Business Development Group, they introduced me to a lot of different networking financial institutions, other small businesses or nonprofit organizations that are set up for funds, grants, additional unsecured loans. Ultimately, got me in a place where I felt comfortable not having to bring in a private investor or bring in private equity. They opened doors for me so that I could find funding to still stay on my feet and not have to give up my business. And I think that one of the big things I learned, which, it's a fear, of course, to run out of money, is that there's a lot of groups out there that really want your small business to grow, and especially medical. Like medical, independent medical practices is a big place where people want to help.
Thank you
because
for
they know
tuning in
that
to this
medical
episode of the
is gonna be
IndeDocs
successful.
podcast.
I mean, there are
Our
really not
producer
enough doctors
is
in
Jenna
the
Lee.
country to fulfill the
Promotional
needs of our
support
society
by
overall.
Uplift
So
Marketing.
medicine is always going to
Mixing and mastering
is always
by
a great
Noah
thing to
Martin.
bet on. And they
Content
open
editing
those doors
by
to
Jenna
the
Lee.
different groups
Additional
that can help
production
me
support
overcome
by
where I
Noah
was
Martin,
at a plateau and
Rebecca
worried that I was
Lockhart,
gonna fall on my
John
face.
Robinson,
And
and the
now
IndeDocs
we're
Board
back
of Directors.
moving in the right direction.
For more information,
And,
please visit us
I wish I
online
just would have
at
found it sooner. When I
IndeDocs.com.
went to the Veterans Business Outreach Center, one of the gentlemen there that's out of the Citadel sent me this graph, and it was called the Entrepreneur Graph of Growth, I guess. And the very top of it, it just shows it goes along with the emotions you go through while you're growing a business and starting a business. And the first part of it is like way high, saying that you have this uninformed optimism, which is 100% true. You get these great ideas, you can practice medicine better, you think you're going to be able to hire the best people right up front. It's just all this great optimism that goes into it. And then when you start out, and there's a lot more things that get involved, and so then you kind of go down this curve a little bit and you get into this what they call informed pessimism. So you are way more informed in your business model. You've kind of got kicked in the rear a couple times from surprises that you just didn't know how to anticipate, and it's okay. But you're feeling really low, and or you run out of money, which is what I did. And so then I have all the information to know what I need, but I'm in a really low point because I feel like I got knocked down a little. And they say that's the part what makes or break a business is what you do from that low point. You either reach out, network, find resolutions, or you get so overwhelmed with fear that you close down. And he said, and that's the point that you're at. And he's like, I got all these doors I can open. These are the people you need to talk to. You need to get out of this space because you're going to go right back up. And, 6 months later, they were right. So it's you can Google it and find it, but it's pretty funny when you see it after opening your business, being open for 3 years, and you see this kind of curve of emotions you go through. And I'm like, oh, it's spot on. So, and they say every business goes through it. So, we're not the first business. I'm not the first business that's been open. People have done this for hundreds of years. So, if they can do it, any one of us can.
Right.
But now that I'm into the third year, I'm really proud that I've done it. I feel like I have learned so much more about medicine, and I love what I do. I love what I practice. I love the field I am in, but I actually feel like I have so much more control over how to practice. I have control and understanding on how we bill out, how patients pay, what insurance contracts look like, how administrative things behind the scenes actually really do play a huge role in patient and clinic flow and safety and efficacy. I've learned that actually opening my doors, I thought for 3 months I was going to have, maybe even 6 months, that someone was going to come and shut me down. And I've learned that that's not the case. In fact, there are many clinics that go for quite some time unregulated. And I'm not saying that I recommend that whatsoever, but up front, even just going through your Department of Health, it's kind of confusing to figure out, what do I need to sign up for? Who do I need to pay to have a license? And the truth is, you figure it out. And if you didn't do something right, someone's going to send you something in a mail and say, hey, you're a new business and you were supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And you get a slap on the hand. No one comes and shuts your doors down unless you're doing something god awful, of course. But
Right,
you
of
know,
course.
if you're practicing standard of care medicine and you're motivated and you're a person that's willing to learn, you ask for forgiveness if you make a mistake. And that's it. It really, I think my biggest fears were, one, the money, and then two was getting in trouble. Like, could I go to jail for something? Like, could I get closed down? Could the whole clinic be shut down and then I owe all this money? And what I've learned is those fears weren't really as much of a reality as I made them out to be. They actually were pretty minuscule. Now, there's things that I do on a day-to-day basis, being small and only 8 women in my practice, that I don't love. I deal with 8 women in my practice, which is good and bad. You know, I sometimes feel like a principal because I have control of our hiring, I have control of how things go. But most of us as physicians never had that. And
Right.
I don't love it, but I would be lying to say I hate it either. There's a part of it that's really rewarding, to know your front desk staff to your back office staff, and have control and have respect for each other, to know that they're working because they really appreciate what you do. And I have control over that because I hired
Right.
them, right?
So that's a word that comes out in all the polls and all the surveys, and the whole topic of physician burnout and all that
Yeah.
comes down to a lack of control or a lack of autonomy, a lack of not being able to face a problem and actually be able to take care of it yourself, as opposed to be at the mercy of somebody else or a system or something that you have, as you said, no control over.
Yeah, 100%.
So the autonomy part sounds to me like that is part of what you're enjoying, is even though there are challenges, at least you have the ability to face the challenges. And for good or for bad, at least you were able to do it.
Yes.
And then you learn and go on to the next one. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
that's very fair. I think having just the control, and sometimes, the first hire or fire you do, you don't know how to do it. It's uncomfortable. There's many things uncomfortable in life, but you do work through it. And yeah, it is 100%. I get to say what my hours are. I get to say what I want my schedule to look like. If I want time off, I don't have to go through 3 different supervisors to necessarily get that. I really do have control. But the other thing I really love is, again, goes back to that altruistic aspect of, I get to treat my patients the way I want myself or my family members to be treated. My patients see me almost every time they come in. Even if it's a quick blood draw, sometimes they'll just see me in the hall. And for me, that was really important. I wanted to be, not necessarily in a small town, but I wanted to be a doctor that if I went out in the community, I could see some of my patients and it felt like I really cared about them. And I do think that's what I provide in our clinic. I have colleagues that see 3 times the amount of patients, don't really know any of them well, and feel like they're just going through kind of a cattle call each day. And that might work for some people, but for me, it just, getting to do it on my own terms, even if this clinic, we're still new in our 3rd year. If we didn't work out, I still have learned so much that makes me feel that I know so much more about medicine in general than I did 3 years ago before I started it. So it's been a huge learning curve, but we're all intelligent people. And I think that once you get over those initial fears, you can really figure, all the other stuff really works itself out one way or another. You figure out a solution for it because you get to, like you said, choose a solution. It's great.
So we've heard about your training, your previous work experience, your current work experience, and all the things. If you could go back and tell the younger Dr. Cox, don't worry about this, and this is the way you ought to do it, or what's the big takeaway looking back that maybe kept you from doing this sooner, or at the time that you prompted yourself to take that big step?
I think really what it comes down to is the fears we have. As doctors, we fear failure. I mean, it is ingrained in us from training onward because We are supposed to do our best. We're supposed to take care of patients. Sometimes we have patients' lives in our hands. So failure is a very scary thing for us. And I don't think we're good at it, to be honest. And so I think that's the biggest thing is I'm going to fail. I'm not going to make money. I'm not going to succeed. I will go bankrupt. I will get shut down. These were all the things I was telling myself just because I didn't really know. I didn't know what I was doing. And I think on the other side of it, now I would tell myself, in fact, it's okay that you don't know everything up front. It is okay and completely normal to have these fears. But at the end of the day, it's not a failure, whether you make it or not. It's kind of a learning experience, and you learn as you go. I wish I would have looked a little bit more into networks up front. I didn't. I kind of went to the first thing. For instance, I went to the first bank that was willing to give me any time, and I stuck with them. And granted, I am where I am now because of them. So I can't have significant regrets. But now I wish I would have reached out to the Small Business Development Center sooner because I think they would have taught me how to look at different institutions, financial institutions, for instance, to see what would make the most sense for me. I think they would have walked me through more of the licensing things that I needed to get done. Like I said, I didn't actually apply for a Mount Pleasant license. Hopefully, no one's listening from there, but for like 6, 8 months. And so I got a letter in the mail saying, "We noticed you're a new business and you owe us money." And I paid them money. But, I think that I just wish I wouldn't have been as scared to reach out and ask and find resources. And hopefully, there's a lot of doctors out there that aren't afraid, but in residency and medical school, there is a part of us that gets this fear ingrained in us in what we don't know. It's just this fear of unknown. And so while we learn and we read and we do a lot of things on their own, many of us have gotten knocked down from asking too many questions or doing too much. And so I think if I could look back, I just wish I would have reached out to and learned the resources that were there even before I started the building blocks, but I ran into them eventually. And so I think the important thing is just to realize that the fear that you have of failure, while it's there, you're more likely to succeed than fail, I think, in this spectrum at least.
One of the things when I talk to residents and fellows and actually even people who are contemplating this is I think part of the key is to, and you mentioned this earlier, this that you have the ability to create the practice environment that you
Yeah.
want, the environment that's going to allow you to practice medicine the way that you want to practice it. And everything else is just a way of making that happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's really it when it comes down to it. I mean, sure, there's little nitty-gritty things of a business that you have to pick up that you weren't trained in medical school and residency for a reason, mind you. They don't want us to know how to run our own practices, but we're intelligent people. And if you have gotten through med school and residency and are practicing, you can easily do this. There's enough resources out there now that you can. But yeah, having that say and having to be able to practice the way I want to and spend the time with my patients and not feel rushed or working because I like it, but not working and overworking because I have to meet a patient quota, that is the most rewarding thing. I have a quality of life that I am very grateful for. I love my life. I love my personal life. And it's only because I pushed to do this on my own that I have that, because I've seen so many of my other coworkers that really struggle with having that balance. You can work a lot. You can work 68 hours a week and be miserable, or you could work 60 hours a week because you want to and you enjoy it, but it's on my terms.
And one of the things that you've mentioned, which again is a recurring theme, is the relationship with our patients, where the doctor patient relationship is really at the bottom of all of
Yeah.
this. So there are a lot of ways to make
Hmm.
money, but there really is only one really good way to practice medicine, and that is when the doctor and the patient are pretty close,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's part of what you're describing. When you keep on saying that I love what I do, I think that's interesting. Why don't you tell the audience what the name of your practice is?
It's Adore Fertility. So love fertility. It was a play off those words. And I do love it. It's a great field to be in, but it's been scary at times. And I think that, when we go back to talking about independent doctors, and I just don't think you're supposed to know all of it up front. but that's what I wanted, right? Like I told you, I wanted a blueprint. I
Right.
wanted someone to have it all figured out. So it was check the box, easy, step by step by step. And yet the fact that you can figure it out on your own and you just keep knocking down little walls and barriers each day or each week, it's actually quite a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. And I've had some lucky breaks. I've had some tough ones too. I had ran out of my initial loan, and that was one of my biggest fears up front. But as you said, there are a ton of resources that you unfortunately probably didn't have years ago, and even 10 years ago weren't available for docs out there. And now there are. So even when I was scared as far as like money and capital, I started reaching out and met into more networks that led me to get to the right people I needed to help me out. And it was amazing how quickly that happened too. All I had to do was start asking people and doors started opening again. So there's a lot more people out there that really support independent practice and small business than we know of because we've not been given that mentorship up front.
So you were lucky enough to live next to the Alexes, right? And Alex kind of got you on at least the initial track. But what if you're somebody else and you don't have an Alex that lives next to you? You still have the same idea. You still came from the same background. How do you think that person, or what would you tell that person to say, okay, looking back, this is the next step I would take?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think if Alex wouldn't have given me the push, I honestly don't know. I don't know if I would have done this on my own. And so I give a lot of credit to him just because it was someone that I respected, I had grown to know over several months, and granted, not years, but I respected him as a businessman. And so he certainly set a lot of my fears aside. But what I would like to think I would have done, or at least tell someone else now, having gone through this, is that, you don't have to know someone that's opened their own business, but you probably do know people that have know people that know people that have. And again, it comes back to maybe not opening a medical practice, but opening a business of some sort. And reaching out to try to ask because I was even afraid to ask. I didn't even know where to ask. But now looking back, you have the Chamber of Commerce, which is a great place for small businesses. Again, doesn't have to be a medical practice, but they've opened businesses. And really, there is an algorithm for each business and how to open it, or reaching out to the small business development groups in each state. There's, at least in South Carolina, they do all their work for free. So you can go to them and they will help you set up a whole business plan and model, which I didn't know until I had the bank involved already. But I would have liked to think that I would have reached out and found more resources, but I don't know if I would have at the point in time that I did. It was that push that I needed from someone to give me the confidence to start really looking harder.
So that's one of the important things about what we're talking about now is that, for example, somebody who is in that situation and doesn't have an Alex next door knows that there's Dr. Cox who
Right.
kind of did this, and maybe she can help me
Yeah.
sort of point me in the right direction, or through organizations. And of course, I've got to plug IndeDocs,
Yes.
but there are people who have done this before, regardless of the specialty. I mean, this is not something where you're reinventing the wheel. You're really just doing another version of it.
100%. And I think that unfortunately in my subspecialty, it feels a little bit more cutthroat. And I think part of that's just because it's such a new specialty. It's such a still elective pet specialty in some ways. Insurance hasn't gotten its hands on it too much yet. It's a very different beast. But with that said, yes, there are a lot of private sole practice doctors out there that you can find, and maybe not all of them are going to be as willing and open to share their path, but there probably are a lot that are. And you just kind of need to reach out and network and see. Because I certainly, at this point in time, having other colleagues now doing this after I did, I absolutely would share any of my knowledge with someone just because, hey, if it helps save a couple mistakes, then it's worth it, you know? But also to encourage them because like you said, not everyone has an Alex or a person next door that can tell you, hey, I've bankrupt companies, I've bankrupt myself, I've done this or that. it's not a big deal. And until you have someone look you in the face that's living in a nice house next to you and knowing that they're doing okay and has been through it, it still seems a little far-fetched and scary. But yeah, there's a lot of resources. And you're right, IndeDocs, it's a reason that you're out here so that you can actually help get more people to listen and give them a network of doctors to give them advice and help them build if this is what they really want to do.
A group of people that we're hoping will be listening are, medical students and residents and fellows. Unfortunately, the way we're taught medicine now is all of the mentors are all kind of growing up within the systems, so to speak, right?
Yep.
So a medical student starting today in the next 8 years of their medical school and residency or a short residency, they're very likely to be only exposed to people who are working in a hospital type environment. And if you don't know what you don't know, then you don't know what you don't know, right? So
Yep.
that's one of the group of people that we're really interested in fomenting the idea that, regardless of what you're interested in this, you can do this.
Yeah.
There are options. So again, being the Alexes for the younger people I think is really important.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. I did not have a lot of exposure for private practice at all. And I wish there was more. Well, what we're doing is trying to get that out there more
Right.
because there needs to be more of us that stand up and say, hey, this is totally possible. And I get it. I get as a new, I didn't have the debt because of being in the military, but I do get coming out of training and feeling like you're a mountain of debt. I get that maybe it is the easiest path of, least resistance going into an institution right up front to just feel like you're getting money back in. But once you get the wind under your sails again, if this is a passion of yours that you really always thought you wanted to have more of a private practice, go look for it because it's worth it. And I think nowadays with internet and everything out there, they have a ton of resources that they can hopefully kind of find people to help lead them.
Being a veteran, is that a community that if somebody was a veteran, is that something that you've been able to tap into, or is that a helpful community to as a resource?
Yeah, certainly we try to market towards that. I also going through having gone through some fertility treatments myself while I was in the military and knowing what the costs were for our active duty or our veterans that came through, we really try to target that population and give them breaks, so to speak, as far as cost breaks, because having come from that community, I want to still serve them in some way. But certainly being a veteran also opened up doors recently for me. So, like I said, when I came to a point where I thought I wasn't going to have funding, I found out that there was a veterans business outreach group here in the community. And then reaching out to them opened up literally 10 more doors. And that's ultimately how I got to this additional funding that I needed. So, yeah, again, I was blessed by serving and having that network of a community behind me. And I do think we get to serve our active duty and veterans. And I do think they come to us when they know we exist. So it helps to have that little niche for sure in my aspect. Not everyone's going to have that. But if you're motivated enough as an independent physician to do this, you're going to find places that you can pivot from and that you can do.
And I think that's the point, right? I mean, that's the
Yeah,
point is that for you, it was veterans, military, whatever. For somebody else, it may be alumni of certain institutions, or,
absolutely.
I mean, there are a lot of different places to tap into, a lot of resources. So,
And they don't need to be doctors. That's the thing.
right.
And I think that's what I thought up front when I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't have a sole practice provider that's in the fertility subspecialty to give me this blueprint. So therefore, I know no one that can help me. Right. That was my attitude. And then it was just a businessman that had bankrupt his own companies at times that talked me into kind of looking into it further. And then it was just another veteran business person that helped open doors to other banking and grants and funds for me. So these people had no experience in the medical field at all, yet some of them were the most knowledgeable people I could have had give me support and advice. And so when you're looking for that person, it doesn't have to be specifically in medicine. It's just reaching out and using the resources there because they're going to know someone that knows someone that knows someone that's going to help you out in some way, shape, or form.
So the frying pan ended up being more like a warming plate, right?
Yeah, it gets hotter some days than others, and some days it cools off.
But you have
But
control of the
yeah,
dial. So
yes, I do. I definitely do now. And yeah, I'm thankful I did it. I have several colleagues now that are actually following in my footsteps from doing it. And it's also cool to be on the other side because I can be a blueprint for someone else now.
right, you'll make it easier for somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I made plenty of mistakes, but I'm still practicing. My business is not shut down. We're doing a lot of great things. So I'd like to think that it's a success story, even if it didn't last for 10 years. But I imagine now, from what I've learned, I feel like the motivation is going in the right direction.
No, it's very clear. Just listening to you, I mean, you corroborated my instinct when I first met you that this was going to be a great conversation and that you'd be a great example, really, for people who are, again, stuck in that I'd love to, but I just don't know that I can do this.
You really can. It's probably one of the most fulfilling things I've done. I mean, I love that I served the military and got to do something different, but this is, it's not residency, it's not medical school, it's not these institutions. It's on your own, and it can be really, really gratifying. I work long hours sometimes, but I don't feel overworked. There's a big difference in it.
Big difference. No, you're absolutely right.
The worst thing you can do is not try. And if you try and you fail, it's okay. You can go back and practice and still make money. But if you don't try, you're never going to know.
So we've covered a lot of ground from, the genesis of your practice and practices. But if there was one thing that you would want listeners to take away from your experience specifically, what would that be?
That's a tough question, because I feel like I've learned a lot and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But probably that's also the moral of the story. You know, owning a business and operating it, there's a lot of different facets of it. And there's times when it's really scary. But if you know that going into it and you say, hey, like, I realize this isn't going to be a walk in the park, but I also have some really great ideas and I know I can do this. I think my motivation was that I wanted to practice medicine in the way I felt I should be practicing medicine. And I felt like I could do it better than some of the institutionalized medicine and get better patient care. So my motivation, I had a strong enough motivation behind me to want it that pushed me to keep figuring things out. And when I came to a crossroad or a problem, finding the resolution to it, because I knew deep down as the doors kept opening, like you said, I really felt like I was meant to do this. I was meant to do this and to figure it out. And if I can give that advice to anyone else, if you're in a place where you're just not happy with how you're practicing, you're not happy with if you have a say in your practice or not, in certain parts of it, you don't feel like you have a voice, there is a whole nother world out there of practicing medicine that you can have if you just have the motivation and the conviction to do it. It's not meant to just be an easy walk, but honestly, it's not that hard either. You just got to want it enough.
On that note, I would like to thank you. Honestly,
Absolutely.
I was so excited when I first met you and immediately thought about, this lady has a lot to say and a lot to offer. So I want to thank Dr. Jeris Cox for joining me today. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us as well. Please make sure to rate and follow the podcast, as that helps us to grow this community and spread the word about these issues. And please tune in next time for another great discussion about independent medicine in South Carolina. From all of us at IndeDocs, take care and stay well.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the IndeDocs podcast. Our producer is Jenna Leaf. Promotional support by Uplift Marketing. Content editing by Jenna Leaf. Additional production support by Noah Martin, Rebecca Lockhart, John Robinson, and the IndeDocs Board of Directors. For more information, please visit us online at IndeDocs.com.